I always thought heartbreak would come like a slow storm, warning signs on the horizon, cracks forming one by one, thunder murmuring somewhere in the distance. But the night, everything collapsed. It didn't creep in. It slammed through my front door like a sledgehammer, shattering the world I thought was solid. My name is Marcus Ellery, and until that night, I believed my marriage to Lennon, my wife of 8 years, was the only part of my life that had truly made sense. We lived in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the outskirts of Brookmere, a place where kids rode bikes and where the smell of barbecues hung in the air on weekends, a place where I believed secrets couldn't survive. I was wrong. I came home earlier than usual that Thursday. My last meeting had been canceled, so instead of staying late at the office, I decided to pick up flowers for Lennon, something I used to do all the time but had forgotten in recent years. Maybe I thought it would spark some warmth back into our house. Maybe I just missed feeling connected to her. The minute I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No TV, no music, no footsteps from the girls' rooms upstairs. Hazel and Maren, our daughters, were spending the weekend at my sister's place, so Lennon and I had the whole house to ourselves. I assumed she was napping or showering. I walked down the hallway. Then I heard it. A breath first. Then a soft laugh. Then a sharp gasp. One I knew wasn't from pain. It was pure pleasure. I froze. At first, my brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe she was watching something on her phone, listening to a podcast, practicing those dumb guided meditations she always claimed calmed her nerves. But the second moan made everything clear. It wasn't just her. There was a man's voice, low and rough, whispering her name with an intimacy that made bile rise in my throat. I stood there, clutching the flowers like an idiot, petals trembling in my fist, as the truth suffocated me. She was cheating. Not emotionally, not through messages, not hypothetically, physically, right now, in our bedroom. Something inside me didn't break. It calcified, hardened, snapped into a cold, detached clarity I'd never felt before. I pushed the bedroom door open a tiny crack, and there she was, my wife, moving like she had never moved for me. Wild, unrestrained, laughing, begging. Her hands tangled in the hair of a man I had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, tattooed, younger. Grant. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. Instead, I lifted my phone and pressed record. Not out of revenge. Not out of anger. Out of survival. Because I knew instantly, whatever I thought my life was, it was over. The room was filled with the sounds of skin, breath, ecstasy, hers, not mine. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't coerced. She wasn't confused. She was happy, radiant in her betrayal. Watching her smile like that felt like being stabbed with a blade heated in fire. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, my hands shook, but the phone stayed steady. She looked alive with him in a way she hadn't looked with me in years. I backed away slowly, closed the door without a sound, and walked out through the kitchen door, leaving the flowers on the counter like a gravestone offering. I sat in my car with the engine off for a full 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, unable to process anything except the hammering in my chest. When my hands finally stopped trembling, I pulled my phone out and called the only person who would answer at this hour, and not judge me for sounding like a man drowning. Nate, I need you. My voice cracked. Nate Hardell had been my closest friend since college, a man who didn't sugarcoat anything but would drag me out of hell if I asked. He exhaled through the phone, instantly alert. Marcus, what happened? I swallowed hard. She's cheating, Nate. A long silence followed. Are you sure? I let the recording play, just for a few seconds. Lennon's voice, breathy, hungry, unrecognizable, filled the car. Nate cursed under his breath. Okay, he said quietly. Listen to me. Don't go back in there. Don't confront her. Not yet. Why not? My voice shook with fury I could barely contain. Because if you want to protect your daughters, you're going to have to play a role. Your wife is reckless. Reckless people get destructive when cornered. You understand me? I did. Even in my rage, I knew he was right. You're going to pretend nothing happened, Nate continued. You're going to act normal until you know exactly what you're dealing with. Pretend. A word that tasted like poison. But I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Fine, I'll pretend. I started the engine and drove straight to my office. I needed distance, light, space, anything that wasn't the walls of my house echoing with my wife's moans for another man. By the time I walked inside, the building was nearly empty. Only Fiona, my assistant, was still at her desk. She glanced up immediately, noticing something in my face I couldn't hide. Marcus, you look shaken. Are you okay? I forced a smile that felt like pulling barbed wire across my mouth. Just a long day. She didn't believe me. Fiona never missed details. But she nodded anyway. I locked myself in my office, closed the blinds, and sat in the dark, jaw clenched so tightly it hurt. The video played again on my phone, and again, and again. Every time I watched it, I lost another piece of myself. But I needed to know the truth. I needed to memorize the details, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because something deeper than anger had begun simmering in my chest. Purpose, resolve, a seed of justice. Because Nate was right. The moment I collapsed, Lennon would weaponize the girls. She would twist the narrative. She would turn her betrayal into my fault. If she had lied about love? If she had betrayed me before our wedding? Like Nate suspected. Then what else could she have lied about? What about Hazel? What about Marin? Were they really mine? The thought nearly knocked me to my knees. By the time I drove home, hours later, the house was spotless. The bed was made. The sheets were gone. Even the candle she lit earlier had been blown out. Lennon greeted me wearing soft pajamas and a nervous smile. Hey, babe, you're home later than usual. I stared at her, feeling the grotesque weight of the truth. I couldn't see my wife anymore, only a stranger pretending to be her. Dinner was quiet. The walls felt too tight. She kept glancing at me with panic flickering behind her smile, and I knew she was terrified I would ask why her hair was still damp, why her voice was hoarse, why the laundry room smelled like bleach. But I said nothing. I pretended, just like Nate told me. Inside, though, a war was already starting, and I wasn't the one who lit the fuse. When I woke up the next morning, I felt as if the air around me had changed, thicker, colder, vibrating with the weight of decisions I hadn't yet made. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside my apartment window. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, and for a moment, I felt like the entire world was moving on while I was stuck in the same emotional quicksand I'd been drowning in since the truth came out. I reached for my phone and saw a string of messages from Harper, all unread. Part of me wanted to delete them without opening anything, to erase her voice from my life entirely. But another part, the part that still remembered our good days, our plans, our laughter, hesitated. I didn't open the texts. Not yet. I couldn't give her that power this early in the day. Instead, I sat up, ran my hands over my face, and told myself to breathe. I had choices to make, and for once in my life, they had to be for me, not for the version of me I tried to be for everyone else. The previous night with Jace replayed in my mind, the way he looked at me as if he'd been carrying the truth for months, the way he finally broke down and admitted everything. It wasn't just cheating. It was the betrayal of two people I trusted. Two people who should have protected me, not destroyed me. I got dressed slowly, almost mechanically, and headed to the kitchen. As I waited for the coffee to drip, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry in the same burning, chaotic way I'd been the first day. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't fantasizing about revenge or begging the universe for explanations. What I felt now was different, sharper, clearer, like I'd stepped out of the fog and could finally see the road ahead. By the time I left the apartment, I had made my decision. I didn't go to work. I didn't go to my parents' house like I'd considered the night before. I went somewhere else, somewhere neutral, private, quiet. A place where no one knew me, where no one would look at me with pity or judgment. The small cafe by the river had always been my escape in college, and for some reason my footsteps carried me there without hesitation. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, staring at the ripples on the water as boats drifted lazily along. I needed peace to gather every piece of myself that had shattered. And unexpectedly, that's exactly what started to happen. My phone buzzed again. Not with a message, with a call. Harper. I let it ring, then ring again, and again. When she finally gave up, there was another moment of quiet, and I felt something inside me settle. She no longer controlled my emotions. She no longer dictated the rhythm of my day. That power was gone. A few minutes later, Jace texted me. Unlike Harper's frantic walls of words, his message was short. I'm moving out today. I'll leave the key on the counter. I'm sorry, Landon. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt triumph. But instead, I only felt closure. Like the final page of a chapter finally turned. I looked out at the river again, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I pictured my future without either of them. It wasn't empty, it wasn't bleak. It was open, painfully open, but open nonetheless. And maybe that was enough for now. After finishing my coffee, I walked along the riverbank, letting the late afternoon sun warm my face. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know exactly what my next step would be. But I knew one thing. I was done being the version of myself that tolerated lies, excuses, and half-truths. From now on, I would protect my peace the same way I once protected relationships that never deserved it. When I finally returned home later that evening, the apartment felt different, quieter, emptier, but not in a painful way. It felt like a place I could rebuild from, a place that was mine again. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized that block by block, choice by choice, breath by breath, I was beginning to reclaim my life. Not for revenge, not for closure, for me. In the days that followed, I felt as if I were living inside a slow sunrise, the kind where darkness doesn't disappear instantly, but fades little by little, giving way to something gentler, warmer. Life didn't magically fix itself, and the pain didn't vanish overnight. But there was a shift inside me, a quiet one, but real. I cleaned the apartment the first morning Jace's things were gone. Not out of spite, not to erase him, but because I needed to reclaim the space with my own hands. I opened every window. I let the cold air fill the rooms. I scrubbed the counters, the floors, even the walls, as if wiping away the echoes of the lies that had lived here for far too long. By the time I was done, the place felt lighter. I felt lighter. Harper tried contacting me again. Calls, messages, voice notes filled with apologies, explanations, and desperate pleas. I listened to none of them. I didn't block her out of anger. I simply didn't have anything left to give her. Forgiveness, rage, closure, all of that would come on its own timeline. But I didn't need her words anymore. I didn't need her accountability or her regret to define my next chapter. I learned something important through all of this. Sometimes the most powerful decision you can make is to walk away without looking back. About a week later, as I was coming home from work, I found an envelope taped to my door. My stomach tightened when I saw Harper's handwriting. For a moment, I debated throwing it straight into the trash. But something in me, not curiosity, but finality, made me open it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. No dramatic confessions, no excuses, just a quiet acknowledgement of the hurt she caused, and a promise that she wouldn't disturb my life again. It was the closest thing to peace she could offer. And surprisingly, reading it didn't reopen the wound. It closed it. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and never looked at it again. With time, the silence stopped feeling empty. It started feeling peaceful. I began going for morning runs again. I spent weekends exploring parts of the city I'd neglected for years. I reconnected with people I'd pushed aside during my relationship, not because I needed comfort, but because I finally had energy for genuine connection again. One evening, while walking along the river, the same spot where I'd sat alone on one of the hardest days of my life, I realized something subtle but profound. I was no longer thinking about Harper or Jace. I was thinking about myself, my goals, my future, my life. Pain has a strange way of reshaping you, of revealing the corners of your strength you didn't know existed. And as much as I hated everything I had gone through, I couldn't deny the truth. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was stronger, steadier, more honest with myself. Months passed, and eventually, someone new entered my life. But this isn't a story about that. It's not a story about finding someone better or proving anything to anyone. It's a story about rebuilding, about letting go, about standing up after your world collapses and realizing that the ground beneath you can still hold your weight. And the moment I understood that, I finally felt free. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I no longer let it define me. Not because I replaced what I lost, but because I found myself again in the spaces love had once occupied. My life didn't end with betrayal. It began with choosing myself. And that, more than anything Harper or Jace ever did, became the turning point I didn't know I needed. The moment I became whole, not because someone stayed, but because I finally walked away.